atonement and sin and the cross and the way they show up in Christian parenting teaching. I wanted to explore that a little bit more because it's Holy Week. So my husband's an Anglican priest, recorded audio version of the Stations of the Cross service. I was reading these different elements of the liturgy that Christians throughout the centuries have used to meditate on the cross on Good Friday. I was wondering, how do we get to the place where these theological mysteries are used in formulaic ways in like our how-to books? So, or even in some of these resources, almost a theological role play is being presented. And I don't think Christian authors are setting out to do that. Because they're Christian, they're looking for Christian justification for the ideas they're presenting. And they carry a belief that everything needs to be saturated with the gospel. It needs to be doctrinally instructive. I contend that this is unhelpful for a number of reasons. One, I do think it diminishes the mysteries of the faith. Two, I think we inescapably have a very myopic doctrinal understanding. Most of us are in one particular corner of the church, even if we've worshiped in several different denominations, or we have a very limited historical understanding, and that varies by individual. Some of us maybe have some definitions we've heard in sermons. We've maybe heard sin is missing the mark, or we've been given illustrations to help understand atonement. Some of us who are in more maybe Reformed traditions have had a heavy emphasis of doctrine. So we've maybe gone verse by verse through the book of Romans to make sure we understand doctrine. And what we've really learned is a specific doctrinal approach. And we've become expert at that, but we maybe don't have the breadth. Most of us don't have is a library of church history and an understanding of the way these ideas developed, because none of them are complete and comprehensive. I would contend that what you have is you have what happened on the cross. That defines the atonement. And by defines, I don't mean gives us a definition, just is that. We have Christ did what he did, and everything else, all these motifs, are lenses by which we can try and understand that. And I think you see the New Testament authors trying to do this. They're pulling on biblical motifs and saying, look there, look over there, look at Passover, look there, look over there at the sacrifice, look at the ransom, look at these things throughout Scripture. This is how we can understand what Christ has done. And you have theologians doing that as well. But they're all using them to look at the greater thing. And some of them, like I said, are developing, or we're going to be drawn to them in different ways, or they show up in stronger ways in different denominations. And I want to recommend to you this book, Fleming Rutledge's The Crucifixion, Understanding the Death of Jesus Christ, because it's phenomenal. She touches on both the biblical motifs and the historical development. It's really unparalleled. It is hefty, but I think it's accessible for lay people. So if you want to understand how these things developed, I think your theological imagination will be the richer for it. In Numbers, we get this odd little story about the serpents coming through the camp in the wilderness time, and Moses goes and makes a pole. The Lord tells him to make a pole and put the snake on it, and everyone looks up at the snake. Everyone who looks up at the snake on the pole is saved and healed. And Jesus himself references this as a motif for what he's about to do. And this is not one you hear a lot about because I think we are uncomfortable with it. There's no sacrifice that happens when the people look on the pole. There's no substitution. They are just looking up and they're saved. And I name it here, not to really talk about that as a view of atonement, but because what happens next. A couple generations later, you find the Israelites are worshiping that pole. They have shifted away from the Lord providing the antidote through that moment to worshiping the pole itself. And I want to contend that something similar is happening in our use of doctrine and theology, particularly in Christian parenting resources, but probably in other ways, where we take the thing that's been given us to help understand the greater mystery, and all of a sudden, here we are looking at it like this. And then we imagine this is the thing we must replicate. How this plays out in Christian parenting teaching is you maybe see people talking about how children need to be brought to the cross in moments of discipline. You need to tell your children the gospel during the process of spanking so that they can connect the dots. And the spanking itself becomes a kind of perceived theological role play. Okay, because the wages of sin are death, and God needed to punish sin on the cross, and because Christ was on the cross and atoned for that, and then forgiveness happened, this then is transferred over to what the parent is doing. The child needs to be aware of their sin. They need to be aware of Christ's atonement in that moment. Somehow spanking fits in. It's never very crisply defined, because I don't think anyone would say that children are atoning for their sin, but that's functionally what's happening in this theological role play. But they need to know their sin is painful somehow, and then forgiveness is offered, and forgiveness has happened, and reconciliation happens. Christians, our parents are told, parents are to act as the role of God in the lives of their children. And so by that metric, parents are role-playing the atonement with their children, but they're acting as God. So a lot of times when people argue for spanking, they are making a case from the Bible. They're saying, well, what about the Proverbs? But a good portion of Christian parenting teaching is trying to make a theological case. They're trying to say something doctrinal and say, if you don't have spanking, you don't have the gospel. Which, when you say it like that, sounds as bizarre as I think it is. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. What it's been like for you to be presented with theological ideas, either as a child in this process, or as a parent feeling like you needed to. Check out Fleming Rutledge's book. If you're interested in the audio of the Stations of the Cross, you can find the link in my link tree. And blessed Holy Week, my friends.